Rotating between.
All good, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Ready?
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll fire on them. Brilliant. So a really brief introduction to myself. Hopefully most of you will be aware who I am by now. Yeah, so I'm Julien, the regional pitch advisor for what's called Central West. So I took over from Kevin Duffield back in April time. I've been with the GMA since 2018, but I've covered different regions over the last nearly 7 years now. Brief introduction: we're a GMA, a not-for-profit organisation, and we're the UK's leading industry body for the sports turf and grounds care sector. And basically, we promote the interest and upskilling of volunteers and professionals through all of the sports that make sport possible. We advocate for the grounds profession, and we're big on trying to introduce and build a sustainable skilled pipeline of grounds people. We own and operate Saltex. That happens at the NEC every year, Europe's largest grounds management show. We have a promotional campaign called Grounds Week in March. That's an awareness campaign again for the industry, where we get international and national press involved to promote. Last year we had pieces on Sky and Reuters, various different press outlets. We've also got an industry awards every year that covers volunteers in community organisations, but also goes all the way through to elite venues as well. Next slide, please, Vic. So, brief introduction to the program that I work within and that you guys benefit from. The Pitch Advisory Service is a program that the GMA deliver on behalf of Sport England and the Football Foundation, who are the funding partners, and we also work in association with the England Cricket Board, Rugby Football League, and Rugby Football Union. And this program is all about the grassroots game, so it's enhancing the education and training of volunteers predominantly within football. We work from National League all the way through to local authorities, education sites, grassroots clubs like yourselves. We obviously help to get the funding that's available out of the door, so facilitating advice around specialist machinery, pitch renovation and maintenance advice. Next slide, please, Vicky. So this evening I wanted to repeat a session that we did face to face back in September, I think it was. And often kind of autumn time, I'll do a relatively generic kind of how to keep your pitches in the best nick kind of through the winter. But I think because of the conditions that we've experienced in recent years around really sustained, prolonged, heavy rainfall and the impact that has had on grassroots clubs, I developed this content kind of on the back of a piece that we did for the Football Foundation groundskeeping community and the GMA toolkit, to try and really sort of focus on understanding why our pitches suffer with standing water or why they get saturated, and kind of how to try and understand and cope with that. We'll probably look to deliver something maybe very early March around end of season sort of renovation work and spring renovation work, which is again sort of a more typical session that we deliver. But hopefully as we start to sort of come out of this prolonged cold snap into a period where this is probably going to be at the forefront again, you'll find this evening's content useful. I think, as Vicky mentioned, these sessions are really about yourselves getting the most out of them. So if you want to chat about the cold weather that we've had and any impact that might have on your pitches or things to avoid doing when the weather's like it has been, then we can certainly cover that off. I'm going to try and get through this slide deck by 7:30, 20 to 8-ish, and then that'll give us plenty of time to cover off any questions. Next slide, please, Vicky. So the things we're going to look at this evening, when is wet, too wet. So we're going to look at the various perspectives where whether a pitch is fit or not comes into play. Knowing your enemy, and that's all around understanding what's causing the waterlogging on your site as best you can. Making proactive use and understanding weather forecasts. This is kind of teaching you to suck eggs, I'm sure, but knowing the rules around cancellations and postponements in your relevant leagues. When play goes ahead, kind of what to expect, and then the aftermath of that, and how we can recover the pitches following usage in wet conditions. Next slide, please, Vicky. So considering various perspectives, so this was something that I was absolutely dreadful at. I spent 10 years as a professional groundsman in a professional football club, and certainly in my first 2 or 3 years, I really struggled with coaches, players, whoever, wanting to use the pitches when they were not in what I would deem a fit condition. I think, as Andy will probably agree, it's something that you learn to deal with and build on as you get experience and you go through. But I think one of the main things, the main bits of learning that I've taken as the years have gone by around is trying to consider the different perspectives and the different people at play when we're assessing whether training or fixtures should go ahead in wet conditions. Obviously, for us as grounds people, the kind of the hours of preparation that have gone into preparing that pitch and also the potential repair works that will be required, and the long sort of short and long term effects of play, that tends to be at the forefront of our minds. But it's also helpful to be kind of mindful of other factors. Now, I do appreciate that lots of you will have different hats on in terms of, yes, you might be involved in maintaining the pitches, but you may also be a coach or a committee member or etc. So hopefully this will make a bit of sense if like me, a treasurer and a grounds person and various things at a grassroots club. Fairly obviously, club officers and coaches will be thinking about other things than just purely what's best for the pitch. They'll be thinking about fixture congestion. If we're talking about a pitch that's used for step system football, it might be team and support travel, coach and player availability for rearranged fixtures, loss of revenue, certainly if you're dealing with a step pitch. I went to a site last winter that had not played a step 4 game on their home pitch between November and March, and it cost them about 40 grand in revenue and nearly put the club out of business. So thankfully they've now pushed ahead and put in a drainage scheme, but these are all the sort of factors that as a grounds person needs to be thinking about when we're looking at whether, play should go ahead or not. Match officials in theory deal in the here and now, and should be primarily focused on player safety and pitch playability rather than any external influences kind of trying to put pressure on them to play a game or not, although we know that sometimes that goes on. Next slide, please, Vicky. So knowing your enemy. So this slide is a really basic kind of introduction into trying to understand what some of the causes of standing water might be on your pitches. I'm going to start off with high water table. So it's a phrase that's kind of thrown about quite a bit, and when I go out and on visits, and predominantly ones that are around drainage, often people say, well, we've got a high water table, but what does that actually mean? Well, in practice it means that there's a groundwater issue. So basically any rainfall that comes onto your pitch hasn't got anywhere to go. So you can do as much aeration, spiking, shockwaving, decompaction work as you want. But if the water simply has nowhere to drain away to until that water table subsides, um, then the only way to drop that water table is to install a drainage scheme. So if we are digging test pits like the one in the image there, so that's basically a half square meter hole that's been dug to see what happens with the water levels underneath the pitch. If we're digging one of those and we're starting to sort of see water, um, you know, hitting into the topsoil, then that's a fair indication that you're suffering from a high water table, and that simply means that the water's got nowhere to go to until that level starts to drop. So the only thing to drop that water table is a drainage scheme. So again, there are lots of values to aeration, decompaction, and lots of valuable things to those practices in terms of plant health, root development, all that sort of stuff. But if we're purely looking at work that's going to help with our drainage, if we're encountering water like in that picture, then we need to be looking at something more long term, really. Thatch, it can be difficult to measure and kind of discern if you don't quite know what you're looking at, but in basic terms, it's a layer of dead shoots, stems, roots that builds up into a thick mat between the base of the grass plant and your topsoil, and it can hold a tremendous amount of water. So if you've got quite a if you take a sample out with a spade and actually you've got quite a spongy surface, quite a squelchy surface that has got really poor traction and lots of people slip in, but actually you can see that the soil underneath is actually not all that wet. It's a fairly good indication you've probably got a problematic thatch layer, because it holds onto a huge amount of water. It basically acts like a sponge, and it slows anything penetrating through. So oxygen, water, fertilizers that we might apply. Are important to try and start to work at reducing that if we do come across a notable thatch layer. And when I say notable, probably sort of anything north of 15 millimeters, 10 to 15 millimeters, anything more than that, more than a centimeter or so, we need to be sort of trying to take measures to reduce that. Soil compaction is another kind of major contributor to waterlogging. So that is kind of the thing that we're trying to combat when I'm recommending, vertidraining or shockwaving or aeration or any of the other practices that we might be looking at. And on some sites, what we see is a really compacted topsoil that's just got a lot of traffic over it, a lot of machinery's gone over it, and there's never been any relieving of that soil in terms of trying to improve the soil structure. And what we can sometimes see there is that actually the top 50 or 60 millimeters of the topsoil is really compacted, holding, noticeably wetter than what's below it. And actually lower down the topsoil, it's actually drier. So kind of they're the nice sites where I go out to, where actually we can see, well, if we introduce a program of deep spiking or shockwaving, we've actually got some permeable material to get into underneath. So that's something to look out for, particularly through the centres of pitches, goal areas. If you've got areas like that that are really holding on to water, then that can be a cause. And hopefully those of you that are using pitch power, that's the sort of thing that you'll pick up on when you're taking out your soil profiles, or if I'm coming out to see you. The last one to mention on this slide is around soil debris and pans. So you might actually find that your topsoil is reasonably friable, and what we mean by that is it kind of breaks up when you roll it between your fingers, and it drains pretty well. But then at a certain depth, you might have stones or a layer in your subsoil that's kind of causing problems. And again, that will slow the penetration of water and kind of cause water to back up in the profile once that topsoil becomes saturated. So if you do know that if you put in a fork in and you're hitting layers underneath, or you know that somebody's been across it with a decompaction machine and it's bouncing around, and again that's probably something that you want to look out for. But the main crux with this slide is that until we've got an understanding of what is causing our site to drain poorly, we can't actually begin to put the things in place that we need to improve that. So it's a really, really important first step, is that, to try and reduce the guesswork around why our site drains poorly. There's a website called the Land Information System that maps out the soils across the country. And one of the first things that I'll do when I go out on a site visit is to have a quick glance on there, pop the postcode in and see what the description of the local soils is like. And if I'm going to a site where it says seasonally wet, impermeable soils, then I know that, yes, we can do some maintenance work that might improve certain things, but the likelihood is that the end game is going to be some sort of drainage scheme to try and get that pitch playable year round. So again, a useful tool. Next slide, please, Vicky. So getting the best from a weather forecast sounds pretty obvious, and I'll apologise if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but I just wanted to sort of cover off a few basic strategies in terms of trying to make the best of a weather forecast when we're trying to predict kind of what's to come and the impact that it might have on games or training. Once you've kind of established that your site, well, you'll know, is our site susceptible to standing water, the next thing is to know roughly how much rainfall your pitches can cope with before you start to encounter problems. And a really kind of easy way of doing this is to try and, either yourselves or if you've got another club member that lives close to the ground, is to get a simple rain gauge that costs a few pounds, pop it in your back garden, and then on a daily basis, or even in the days preceding a match, just try and make a note of how much rain you've had, and then that can help you to start to build a picture on, when we get 25 millimeters of rain in a 24-hour period, our pitches are playable. But if we get 35 millimeters of rain, our pitches aren't playable. And what that can help to do is that you can then use a weather forecast with a little bit more detail, like the one that's pictured, that kind of gives you an idea of how much rain you're expecting in a given period. So you can look at that and say, well, in the next 24 hours, we're getting 40 millimeters, or in the next 4 hours, we're getting 10 millimeters, and we know that we're getting high intensity rainfall and our pitch can't cope with that. So it's one of those things where, rather than that guesswork of jump in the car, go to the pitch and have a look whether it's playable or not, it just might help us in excuse me, might just help us in the days preceding matches or training to make a bit of prediction whether we're likely to be playing or not. I did kind of touch on the extremes of rainfall, and we are increasingly kind of seeing periods, and one of the things that hurt us really badly last winter was that it seemed like we were okay leading through to a Friday or a Saturday morning, and then we were getting sort of deluges of rain, and that unfortunately is probably going to be a consistent theme with climate change and the warming, is that we will get periods when we do get large amounts of rain in a short period of time, and that is difficult to combat, even for professional clubs that have a constructed pitch. Lots of them will be draining very rapidly, but those that don't benefit from a sand constructed pitch or a hybrid pitch system, even some of the clubs in League One, League Two still experiencing challenges with kind of intense periods of rainfall. So yeah, again, it's just sort of trying to have something else in your arsenal to give you a bit more info. Next slide, please, Vicky. So again, don't want to point out the blinding, obviously, too much for you. But obviously familiarising yourself with the rules of your respective league, where potential postponements of fixtures is concerned. Some will allow you to will allow a home venue to postpone a game and kind of look after their pitches and have that autonomy over that. Often it will come down to a match official where you've got officiating. As I kind of mentioned before, everybody will have their own set of priorities when they're thinking about whether a fixture or training should go ahead or not. And I would say very, very rarely anybody who's not been involved in pitch maintenance will be thinking about it from your perspective. They'll have their own little hat on, their own bubble that they're working within, and it will purely be, well, we want to get this game on to get the match played, and we don't want to disappoint kids or parents or whatever it might be. Match officials, you'll be thinking, well, I've travelled and I want to collect my fee, and is the pitch safe? If it's safe, then and it's not going to affect playability, then they're probably going to give the go ahead. So again, it's just helpful to sort of try and have that in the back of your mind, because otherwise it can become very frustrating when you're having conversation with people as to where the pitches are fit for use or not. Again, just trying to be proactive. If you are expecting weather that's likely to be disruptive, try and communicate this within the club at the earliest opportunity. I'd also say that if you're in a position where you're under any scrutiny about the condition of the pitch, then making sure that you're expressing your concerns, preferably in writing, whether that's a text or a WhatsApp or whatever it is, and just outlining the potential impacts on the playing surface, both in the short and the long term. That's going to put you in a better position if you have to go to a committee or a treasurer saying, well, I need some funds here to get some materials to reinstate some of the damage that you've done, or actually we're going to have to look at some works, going to have to get a contractor in to do some certain works to recover pitches. So it all kind of plays into putting you in a slightly better position. If you are clearly communicating. We'll sort of come on to the potential impacts of playing in wet conditions, but again, useful to know, or to build a bit of a picture of what the time and resources required are to kind of reinstate the pitch after play. If you know that you need to spend 2 hours walking across it with a fork and another hour once it dries out going across it with a grooming tool or a brush or whatever it might be, that's all time that's got to be found, and that kind of reinstatement and repair work, as well as potentially, if the pitchers took a real hammering, you might be saying, well, we hadn't planned to do a really extensive overseed in the spring, but now we might need to. So it's just that sort of thing. And just making sure that you're kind of expressing your perspective and point of view. Next slide, please, Vicky. So, a game on what to expect. I often tried and sometimes was successful and sometimes miserably failed at getting match officials to run opposite lines. Also asking coaches and if they will consider using certain areas of a pitch. So the fairly obvious thing is to try to limit any training or warm-ups in goal areas particularly, but 18-yard boxes and the middles of pitches, if we can, even during wet periods, if we can move a small-sided game or a kids game into a corner of an 11v11 pitch and we rotate it around, that's effectively sort of 4 corners of a pitch being used rather than just hammering the same sort of middle area of the pitch. So they're all kind of useful things that we can try and do. I mean, the main thing that I'd say is that pitch improvement and also safeguarding the quality of pitches is a lot easier if everybody in a club's pulling in a similar direction. So sometimes it can be really helpful to try and spend a little bit of time communicating to coaches or players or parents, whoever it might be, about why you're asking them to do certain things rather than it just be, well, the groundsman's barking at me to do X again and I don't really understand why. And actually, I'm not that bothered what he's got to say. If you can sort of try and build those relationships, it tends to sort of pay dividends in the long term. In pretty much most situations, apart from if you've got a very sandy pitch, which isn't going to be the case for the vast majority of sites in Staffordshire, playing on a wet pitch will lead to increased wear to the playing surface and divots, scrapes, scars. If there's standing water, obviously the playability and the quality of football is going to be impacted as well, and the playing experience will be diminished. In the short term, play on saturated ground is going to reduce the likelihood of being able to play next time as a game. So one of the big ones to think about. The pressure's off a little bit once you get into January and February, but certainly October, November, December is the time to be pushing back really, really hard on usages when the pitch might be 50-50. And the reason why I say that is once you get through to January, February, there's a little bit of a chink of light. Spring's not too far away. And you've got the opportunity for some recovery. Whereas if it's in sort of late autumn, early winter, I have seen scenarios where a pitch has been pretty much written off and where they would have expected to have played on it in relatively moderate rainfall, because they've sort of damaged the pitch so much and lost a lot of grass coverage, and they've really kind of sealed the top of the pitch up. Losing games and training when otherwise they wouldn't have done. So, I'm sure Andy will agree that it's kind of, that kind of pre-Christmas wear or play in really wet conditions is the one that really sort of puts the frighteners on you, because you're kind of thinking, well, rather than it just being a couple of months till things warm up, I've got another 4 months of this, or, and the pitch can really start to deteriorate if there's a lot of damage done early on. So that's probably something to sort of try and use as a bit of a bargaining chip with coaches, is to sort of say, look, play this game now, fine, you've got one game played, but you might lose another 6 and a few, over the coming weeks where we would have played because you've hammered the pitch. So, it is difficult sometimes to kind of not deal in the here and now and sort of look a little bit further ahead, but that is something to think about, because if we do what we've done to a pitch, like in the image there, that was from one of my training pitches at Coventry. We were a soil-based pitch, that particular pitch, no drainage. Thursdays tend to be kind of the main training day in professional football, and basically the man just said, we've got to train today. It's our main day. We've got to train. And I said, okay, well, just as long as you know what the consequences will be. And I said, documented the damage. And then if I got kind of any queries or pushback on the condition of the pitches in the weeks following, I can say, well, my recommendation was not to train. And this has kind of been this has been kind of the upshot of you playing. So, grass does recover well. But particularly when we've gone, like we have in recent weeks, from a wet spell straight into a period of very low temperatures. You may have experienced standing water on your pitch before the frost and the ice came, and now you've actually got, even though it's been pretty dry for a couple of weeks, you've now got kind of iced up standing water on your pitches. And that's another important thing to say as well, is that over the next few days, as the frost starts to come out of the ground, you are going to have probably very saturated surfaces, if not standing water, as that starts to sort of thaw out. So that's something else to look out for as well. And what you can experience when that top sort of starts to thaw out is, if there's play on that, you can sometimes get a shearing of the roots, because the soil, the top 2-3 centimeters might have thawed out, but actually underneath it's still hard. So what happens then is that you just sort of take the top out, and you can suffer a lot of loss of grass cover in that period, and it won't recover because you've kind of broken the roots essentially. So that's something to think about in the coming days as we approach, play at the weekend or whatever it might be, is um, not just sticking a key in the surface or a stud, but actually use a fork or something, and see actually how far down have the pitches thawed out. And also kind of managing expectations a little bit, that just because the leaf frost's gone and just because the ground frost is starting to come out doesn't necessarily mean that pitches are going to be playable straight away. Next slide, please, Ricky. So the aftermath. So this is another example of a football manager's 101 of what not to do. So expecting heavy rainfall. Julien, can you verti drain the pitch before training to make sure training goes ahead? It's not the best idea, Gaffer. What we might end up with is test tubes full of water, and this is a good example of what happens if you verti drain when the soil is too wet. You effectively kind of seal the inside of the soil profile, and where the spike goes into the ground, it's essentially like running a finger down wet plasticine. And then all that happens then, we did get this training session on, and this picture's from a couple of days afterwards actually, but what it does demonstrate is that once you do that work in the wrong conditions, this is the consequence. So a couple of days later you get heavy rainfall, you're thinking, well, it's full of holes. You can see the holes in the bottom picture. Those of you that are a bit keener eyed, and in the bottom of the picture, the holes are there, the top's open, but there's nowhere for the water to go now in those holes, because you've sealed up the topsoil and essentially created a load of little test tubes, so they're just full of water. So again, it's doing the right practices at the right time, and sometimes it's better to do nothing at all rather than sort of desperately try and do something. Particularly with aeration or decompaction, the soil moisture is absolutely critical. So whether a game or training's gone ahead, and kind of the other reason why it's useful to get a grasp on weather forecasts is also the last thing that we want is a game to start, pitch gets annihilated for 45 minutes and then it gets called off at half time, because then you've potentially got that you got to rearrange that fixture anyway or play it again, and you've had a real heavy use and damage to the pitch that was unnecessary. So as I mentioned, good practice to document the damage that's been done, and also, as I sort of said, keeping records of any warnings or advice that you might have given. I very simply kind of used to take pictures and then send just a little memo really to our chief exec, just to say, look, usage is going ahead, but the recommendation was that training was limited, or it was limited to certain areas, and that hasn't happened. So, just letting you know, kind of thing. I appreciate, as grassroots volunteers, there's a finite amount of admin and record keeping that we're going to do, but there are certain things in certain situations that might be helpful to you. fairly obviously, or hopefully obviously, if you've got a pitch in condition like the one that's pictured, keeping off it completely, even walking over it, you want to avoid, and waiting for the pitch to dry out adequately is a really, really basic rule of thumb. If I could draw up any water underfoot, so if I was putting pressure on the soil and drawing up water, that would be a fairly good indication that it's not fit for machinery. It might be if you're walking normally and you're not drawing any water up, you can sort of get on there and do some hand repairs. But certainly, if you're effectively squeezing down on the soil and drawing any water up, you don't want to go near it with any machinery at all. Please absolutely do not consider any rolling of the pitch, no matter how hammered it's been, when you've got saturated ground conditions, because all that will happen then is that any space that there is in the soil for oxygen and water and nutrients to move through, you're just going to completely seal it up. And then you're only going to worsen the drainage characteristics. So the next time you get rainfall, that's just going to literally just sit on top. It'll just effectively be what's happening. It'll just replicate what's happening in this picture. Divot repair, whilst it's very onerous, and if I had a quid for every hour I spent divoting, I'd be wealthy, and Andy would be a billionaire. So it is onerous, but even if you've got half an hour or an hour just to walk over an area and put the very worst back, it's time well spent. If you can't get machinery onto a pitch, you can get pedestrian drag brushes that are literally kind of you drag them behind you or push them in front of you, and that just helps to stand the grass back up, because sometimes loss of grass cover, as in this picture, quite a lot of the grass coverage there has just been rolled or trodden down into the pitch surface. And actually, if we can help to stand that up, we might recover quite a lot of that grass coverage. But what can happen sometimes is if we leave it there, it just rots away and we kind of lose that grass cover. So even if we've got a 6-yard box that we can take the time, just getting a pedestrian drag brush across, just standing up the worst of the damaged area before it's fit enough to get machinery onto it, can be worthwhile. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, only once there's no evidence of water being drawn up underfoot and you're absolutely convinced that it's fit to take machinery, should you consider doing that. If you go on and start to see wheel marks or brown marks or anything like that, then it's not fit, and you should just kind of put the equipment away and try another day. I know. I've been a grassroots volunteer since the age of 15, and I've made mistakes, and I know it can be tempting, when you've got a couple of hours in the week and that's your only chance to get something done, you can be itching to kind of get that machinery out of the shed and do something. But you just got the thing you've always got to be asking yourself is, what am I trying to achieve by doing this? And if you're not actually going to achieve what you're setting out to do, it's not worthwhile doing it. Next slide, please, Vicky. So that I'm glad to say it was not one of my pitches, but in the medium terms, kind of the long terms, we've kind of covered off the short term effects. Once the pitch is dried out adequately, we might be able to think about aerating or decompacting the surface as soon as conditions allow, to kind of alleviate that compaction that's happened through play in wet conditions. If pitches are severely worn and don't recover, that's obviously when we've got to be thinking ahead to spring and sort of the pitch recovery and renovation work that we might want to carry out, and what the priorities are going to be there, and how thoroughly we're going to need to do that work. And even if it's in the early season in September and October, and this September was a good example. We had a horrendous September, 250 millimeters of rain, I think, in where I live, and it was probably more in Staffs. during September, and there may have been situations where we had a relatively dry October, and some people would have been trying to get some seed in the ground and recover areas of damage even then. So that I think probably covers off the sort of short, medium, long term thoughts and impact. That sort of brings this little section to a close. I only go to the next slide, Vicky. I think that's going to go into we're going to go into a little bit more detail around goal area repairs. But if anybody's got questions on that particular bit, now's probably a good time to stick your hand up or pop it in the chat. If not, we'll move on. No, good stuff. We'll roll on then, Vic. So I wanted to cover off a little bit along the same theme what we're talking about tonight. That I do see quite a lot on grassroots pitches, and one of my biggest bugbears really is seeing games cancelled because of goal areas like this. 95% of the pitches is fine, and then you face with a goal area like this. So this is kind of what we're trying to avoid, is this dished goal mouth that's just ponding water, because basically anywhere on your pitch where you've got an area that dips in, because water travels across through the topsoil, it is just going to pond and pool. So this is probably one of the easiest things to sort of try and combat this. I'm just going to talk you through. Next slide, please, Vicky. So what do I need to try and avoid a dished goal area? So I'm going to need some sport sand or a sand soil mixture, and I'm not talking about builder sand or washed sand or sharp sand or anything like that. I do mean a 70-30 mixture or an 80-20 mixture, preferably from a reputable sand or dressing supplier. It should be screened to 3 mil, so you shouldn't have any stones or gravel or anything bigger than that within it. Invest in a decent pan shovel, a wheelbarrow, a garden fork. If the soil temperatures are probably above, I mean, grass seed will germinate 5, 6, 7 degrees, dependent on the mixture. But realistically, in a goal area, to get it to sort of take and establish consistently, needs to be above 10, really. And then a plastic landscaping rake. So they're kind of the tools that we're going to want. Next slide, please, Vicky. And then the order of how we're going to want to do things. So with this, we are talking about little and often repairs of your goal areas, and I do appreciate for those of you that have got multiple pitches, it can be a little bit onerous, but even if you can do these sorts of repairs a little and often, weekly, fortnightly, monthly, whatever it might be, the main goal, yes, it would be lovely to maintain a nice green goal area year round, but that's not going to be realistic in the vast majority of situations. But actually a really, really big win is just keeping that goal area level. So even if you've lost your grass cover, it's still worth carrying out these repairs, because then what you'll find is that area is less susceptible to standing water. When you come to do your end of season work, you're going to be seeding into a level area. What I see quite a bit, people that get their pitch disc seeded or dimple seeded, contractor will come in with a seeder, they've got a dished area in their goal mouth and the seeder just goes straight over the top of it, and they're not actually getting any of that seed into that goal area. And then a few weeks later, they're so really struggling with their goal mouths, they're not coming through. Everything else has come through beautifully, but our goal mouths aren't where they should be. And often that's because there's it might even be just a little dip there, a couple of centimeters is enough. So in terms of the steps, first thing first, we want to kind of try and replicate what's in that first image. So to use a garden fork to create hole pattern in that goal mouth, and basically that's just going to help to keep the area firm and keep any water uh, draining away, and also decompact that area. Goal areas are obviously heavy traffic areas of the pitch. Um, it is a little bit of a balance with this. You want to do this too often because it can destabilize the area a little bit, but generally speaking, it's good practice to pop some holes in. And then we're going to want to apply the sports sand dressing to the area, and I do mean just a dusting, because what we want to try and avoid is smothering any of the grass that remains in that area. So you can kind of see in that next image along, there's a few flecks of grass coming through there, and what we don't want to do is pile a load of sand on top of it and smother all of that grass coverage, because it'll just die back. So just a little dusting, a few, a couple of pan shovels worth on the areas that you're trying to apply it to, and generally speaking, you just want to kind of do an even spread, so you kind of try and spread it in an arc. It's difficult to explain uh, over a webinar, but essentially you're sort of working from your hip and sort of trying to create a semicircle, essentially. So you're creating lots of semicircles across that goal area and a nice even spread of sand. Um, if ground conditions are appropriate, we can incorporate a little bit of grass seed, and that literally, take a bucket out with you, or you can mix it in with what's in the wheelbarrow. If you are applying it to the area, a really aggressive throw to kind of try and disperse the grass seed evenly is kind of what's required. Don't put loads of grass seed there. You just want sort of a nice even amount. And then landscaping rate. Great thing with these is you can lie them. You can use the back to sort of smooth the area out, and also help you to understand what the drop might be with the area surrounding the goal mouth and how much the depression might be. The other thing that works quite nicely, I use a builder's chalk line, just carry one in my pocket and a couple of pegs, and you can just run it across the goal area, and that'll help you to sort of see what the drop is. So it might only be half a centimetre, or you could have an area that's much more dished. The main thing to say with this is that realistically, if your goal mouth's kind of got a depression more than probably 4 centimeters, it's not going to be viable to kind of do these in-season repairs. You are going to have to do something more significant out of season, rotivate, bring to a level, returf, whatever it might be. But these little and often repairs in season and trying to keep the area level can help. If the temperatures are there, you can use a germination sheet if you've got one, just to kind of protect the area and encourage the grass seed to germinate and come through. But scaffold netting is quite a cheap and readily available alternative to germination sheets that can be a little bit more expensive. So if you are just doing a localized area like a goal mouth, particularly if you are on a site that suffers from vandalism, you can get like a 50-meter roll of scaffold netting for 50 odd quid. So it's not the end of the world if a piece gets ripped off or pinched or whatever it might be. So yeah, that's just something that's worth doing little and often at this time of year. Grassroots football pitch, if it's too wet to get machinery on, I would be focusing on whatever hand repairs you can do, hand forking and looking after your goal areas. They'd be sort of my two big areas of focus if you can't get any equipment on the pitch. Next slide, please, Vicky. So I'm going to scoot over decompaction and aeration fairly quickly. Hopefully those of you that have been in receipt of pitch power reports will kind of have guidance with more information. You can also go on the Football Foundation groundskeeping community, where we've got technical resources group that goes into all these practices in much more detail. But yeah, next slide, please, Vicky. So, very brief bit of science. Why does the soil need air? Microbes that live in the soil basically convert the nutrients for the grass to use, and they need air to live. So what we're trying to introduce in our soil and trying to promote is something called pore space, and it's essentially the space in the soil between the soil particles in which basically the air moves, roots grow, and water penetrates through, and this allows the uptake of water and nutrients through the roots. Next slide, please, Vicky. So this is kind of an outline of what a well-structured soil looks like on the left. So you can see that you've got plenty of space there, pore space as we call it, for air and water to move through and nutrients to move through. On the other side, we've got a compacted soil, which is what you'd expect to see on a poorly draining site, where basically there isn't anywhere for the water to move through, there isn't anywhere for the nutrients to travel and the roots to grow and thrive. Next slide, please, Vicky. So what causes compaction? I think we've touched a little bit on it tonight, but obviously play, walking, travel, any events that you might have on the pitches, whether it's a car boot sale or junior football tournament in the summer or whatever it might be, sort of, or play, standard play through the year. All of that traffic causes compaction. Maintenance is a big one. If you think about the amount of times that we might be going over a pitch with a mower, and if that mower's got rollers on, all of that kind of compaction every time we go across it with equipment. So as much as we're doing our best to present the pitches nicely and make them look good, all of that has a kind of a build-up impact in compacting the surface. And obviously repetitive use of particular areas will speed up the rate of compaction. So, broadly speaking, kind of the width of a 6-yard box end to end tends to be kind of the most compacted area of a pitch. But if we've got other areas of the pitch where repetitive drills are being done or repetitive kind of small games are being done, then that will lead to an increase in compaction, and you can see it on pitches come the end of the season, where you'll have the wings that have recovered really well, and grass colour and coverage is good and grass health is good, and then you'll have the middle of a pitch where it looks stressed and it looks tired. And one of the kind of the big telltale signs when you start to take samples out is that you'll often find in compacted areas of the pitch, and 6-yard boxes are almost always demonstrate this. When you start to take soil samples out, you'll see that the root depth in a goal area or in a 6-yard box versus the root depth on a wing is often half, or they're chalk and cheese, and a lot of that is just down to the compaction of that area and the stress that's happening on the grass plant in that particular area. Next slide, please, Vicky. So using that lovely image again, so what happens when a soil becomes compacted? So compacted soils hold on to water more tightly, and drainage is impaired, and because there isn't connection between the pitch surface and those spaces in the soil, the pores actually hold water against gravity. So normally it would be kind of pulling the water, whereas that doesn't happen when we've got a compacted surface. So unfortunately, in the worst case scenarios, we end up with a pitch like the one pictured. Next slide, please, Vicky. So different forms of aeration and decompaction. I'm just going to kind of cover off these pretty quickly. So the top image is that of a vertidrain. So it's a solid tine that penetrates the ground, and that can either be done if we're just trying to aerate at 90 degrees, or if we're trying to heave the pitch, or promote some decompaction. We need to put a little bit of an angle on that to actually get that fracturing effect. So the tine effectively goes in, fractures the soil slightly, and lifts out. Otherwise, we are effectively just doing aeration. We're just poking holes. Linear powered machines. So I know that there's quite a lot of shockwaving that goes on in Staffordshire, particularly. And basically, they in the bottom image put linear channels through the pitch, and that's kind of particularly effective with drainage in mind, because it helps to create those channels where the water's moving across and traveling. So my eldest saying night night, and then we have those channels where the water moves across, and then the water sort of goes into those channels and travels and drains away. So again, there's no right or wrong, but they do different jobs. I think one of the things that we find is managing expectations a little bit with decompaction. I think there's some people that have never had it done before kind of think, well, we'll get a contractor to come in and do this for us, and our pitches are never going to hold water again. And it isn't the case. It is kind of an ongoing process of improving the soil structure of your pitches. And a pitch in year 6 that's been verti draining twice a year, or verti draining in the spring and doing decompaction in the autumn, which is probably what I'd suggest if you can afford to do it twice a year. A pitch in year 6 is going to be much better structured and much better draining than a pitch that's just had it done once. It's fairly obvious to say, but again, managing expectations, you might not see an immediate impact, although I have seen pitches where linear decompaction in particular, if it's done before kind of the heaviest rainfall starts to come, you can in certain circumstances see a significant improvement in a wet spell or a winter period following it being done. Verti draining in and of itself is probably particularly beneficial in terms of promoting that pore space that we were talking about, improving grass plant health, and improving the depth and the density of the roots. I kind of decompaction, and probably verti draining in particular, I sort of refer to as a free fertilization, because what you'll normally see when it's been done for the first time is an immediate green up of the pitch and an immediate improvement in growth of the pitch. And the reason for that is that your grass plant's suddenly able to access a lot more nutrients that are locked up in the soil that it couldn't otherwise previously access. So it's just about understanding what decompaction we're doing, what aeration we're doing, and what time of year we want to do it, depending on what our budgets allow and what our expectations are of that when we're doing it. A little point of note regards shockwaving in particular, kind of that powered linear decompaction, is that if you've got clay soils, those channels can last quite a long time. So you just want to be erring on the side of caution as to how late in the autumn or winter that happens. Ideally, for me, that's probably kind of if it's moist enough, probably kind of a back end of September, October job that then gives you the improvement to carry you through the winter. It isn't so much a response to kind of wet weather. It is all about the soil conditions being at their best. And moist rather than wet is kind of always the thing that we want to be thinking about when we're doing decompaction. I have seen some sites where they've done linear decompaction in kind of March, April time, and then if we hit a drought like we did in 2022, cracks in the summer months that you can literally put your fist down. So you do want to be a bit cautious with that. And then surface slitting, which is the orange machine in the middle. That is a more regular practice. So if we're talking about verti-draining in the spring and shock waving in the autumn, the slitting is what we would do on a more regular basis when ground conditions allow. So probably on a fortnightly basis. Next slide, please, Vicky. So that's kind of the main bulk of this evening's content done with. A quick kind of plug for GMA membership, because we are a membership organisation. What are the benefits of that? So discounts on training courses and qualifications for any of the online courses that are kind of a prerequisite of Football Foundation funding. You can gain discounts on those. We do have a legal helpline service, subscription to our quarterly magazine. We do also have an Ask the Expert service, which goes into more kind of the areas of outside of the regional pitch advisor remit, so getting into pitch construction, drainage, basic guidance and advice. We have a technical library, and for those of you that attend Saltex, free parking and a refreshment at Saltex, and we do have other benefits such as mental health support, etc. Next slide, please, Vicky. Yeah, I touched on Saltex briefly. We had nearly 8,000 visitors at Saltex this year over the 2 days, or last year, I should say. 400 plus industry leading brands. We've been going for 87 years now. And it's really worthwhile popping along. It's not too far for yourselves in Staffordshire to travel down to, particularly if you're looking at new machinery or equipment or wanting to sort of build relationships with suppliers. And this year it's going to be the 11th and 12th of November at the NEC Birmingham. Next slide, please, Vicky. Yeah, Football Foundation groundskeeping community. If you're not on there already, there's 2 areas to it. There's basically the community support group, which is like a Facebook for grounds people. So you can go on there, ask questions, post pictures, speak to. We've got over 3,800 users now, predominantly all from grassroots organisations up and down the country. So what's been quite nice as the community's grown is, rather than it being myself and the other regional pitch advisors responding to questions, the community are offering their input and support and advice as well from their experiences at a grassroots level. And then we've also got the technical resources area, which I touched on earlier, which covers everything from all of the pitch maintenance machinery that you can get support with through funding, pest, diseases, disorders, how to mark out a pitch from scratch, guidance around applying fertilizer, pretty much anything you can think of with grounds maintenance. There's an area on there. And I think, Vicky, that brings us through to questions. So I've run pretty much the time, I think. So yeah, this is just an opportunity for anybody to ask questions about this evening, or anything that they want to talk about they've been experiencing on their pitches in the recent weeks, or the floor is yours, gents, basically.
I've got a couple of questions, Julian.
Go on, Clive, fire away.
It's about goal areas. I've seen pitches that have had turf put down in the goal area.
Yeah.
I've also seen a pitch with artificial turf in the area, and this is during November, when obviously there's no chance of regrassing it. But the dip was so bad, they've had to fill it in and then top it with either the turf or the artificial stuff. Are there any restrictions on that, or is that not?
that would come down to the rules of the respective league and whether the person officiating deems it as being safe or not. One of the big challenges with returfing at a grassroots level is that quite often the turf that's used is not thick enough to actually withstand the usage. Returfing even fairly localized areas like goals, mouths is fairly specialized, and the problem that you've got particularly at this time of year is what you'd ideally do is measure very carefully kind of the depth and the width of the turf that you're looking to use, and you do quite a lot of cultivation to the ground underneath to try and avoid any sort of pan between the existing soil underneath and the new turf that's being applied. And if it's done as I see it more typically done at a grassroots level at the end of the season, the idea is that you've then got a nice friable soil underneath for the roots to develop and hopefully bind to what's there already. The reality is at the grassroots level is that, number one, this time of year, you're going to probably struggle to get hold of turf, but if you can get hold of it, it's probably not it's not going to be thick cut enough to withstand the play. Andy will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the turf that would be used in professional football is probably at least kind of 40 to 50 mil thick in terms of the rolls, and that gives you enough depth and kind of structure that when a boot's going through it or there's play, it can withstand that. Whereas most of what you get kind of commercially available or available for the domestic market might be sort of 20 mil, 30 mil, and it does tend to kick out. So yeah, not advisable. And as I said, it in an area because it won't bind and it'll just kick out and be unstable and unsafe. But it is quite a specialised thing, returfing a goal area effectively. Unfortunately, what I often come across in grassroots level is, particularly when it's done at the end of the season, is if they haven't had adequate rainfall or if it hasn't been looked after very well, the turf just dies off or fails to establish or gets kicked out. So again, it's a question of when it goes down, how long you can keep off it before it's played on. But there isn't any viable expectation of kind of the roots or anything binding or establishing at this time of year. So yeah, it's not ideal, Clive, but it's kind of, no, I suppose it's the difference between potentially playing or not. So yeah, whether it's fit would be down to the league or the official.
Yeah, it was more of an emergency.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Just to get a game from games played, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, if anybody's got any thoughts, they might be sat there thinking, I don't want to ask this because I don't want to look daft, but there isn't anything such as a silly question. I can guarantee if you're thinking that somebody else on the call will be. Like I said, these evenings are very much about you getting what you can from these sessions. As much as I like to talk and and wax on. So yeah, anything at all that you want to ask questions about, even if it's how to use pitch power effectively, what's happening with my funding, how do I manage my funding, anything around that, please do fire away. If not, I'll let you all get off and go on, Clive. Yeah.
Frost damage. Have a situation where, a bit like the weather now, the frost is just lifting off the ground.
Yeah.
And when you look at the surface, yeah, it's great to play on. It's damp. It'll take a stud.
Yeah.
So can we not play? But I'm told that that is not a good time to play because the frost is still coming out, and as you said earlier, you can get root damage.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
what are the decision factors involved?
Yeah, I mean, that's a real tricky one because if you've got frustrated players and parents, and they've already lost a couple of weekends of games because of the cold weather. They're absolutely desperate to get on, and if they see green and it's soft, they won't understand why they shouldn't be playing. And the only real hope you've got with that is kind of trying to make the case as to the potential damage that's likely to occur. Like I said, if you've got a thawed top but a frozen underneath, you will get that root shear, and the damage can be quite significant when the frost's coming out of the ground. And all of that water that's thawing as well, it can make pitches very saturated. So yeah, it's a tricky one because it's ultimately going to come down to whose decision it is to let play or training go ahead or not. But yeah, it is kind of I remember one winter where we just kept getting periods of heavy rainfall followed by prolonged cold, and then the cold had come out and the soil was still saturated from the heavy rainfall before, and it was just a repeated cycle. And it's kind of a groundsperson's worst nightmare, really, is sort of prolonged rainfall prior to a cold spell, or on the flip side, rainfall that comes after a cold spell, because it's just one set of stresses to the pitch after another. So yeah, you do have to be a bit careful of that, Clive, in the same way as ideally we don't want people traipsing all over pitches with leaf frost, because it causes black footprints and snaps the leaf and damage. But often that's more of a problem if there isn't a ground frost. If the temperatures have been as low as they have been recently, it's been bone hard. I'm sure it is for yourselves as well, being further north. So but yeah, in the coming days, that's gonna be something you need to watch out for. Kind of that, you will expect some probably more significant damage than you normally would if pitches are played on as the frost's coming out of the ground.
Okay.
Good stuff.
You haven't said much.
Just unmute yourself, Clive. No, I'm just sitting observing, mate. After a busy few weeks, it's nice to just sit back and relax. And
How are your pitches in these conditions?
the soil pitches are just rock hard frozen. So obviously we sit on the flood playing down at the training ground, but I was saying to Julian before, I think we're about 2 inches depth of the frost. Going back to what Julian was saying, totally agree. And also you have to think of player safety as well, because if it's only defrosted maybe 3 or 4 mil, the players can be quite slippy as well. So we'll have our coaches tomorrow probably asking us to train on grass, like Ryan, Shawcross and that, but we'll probably tell them no. It's rock hard. It's as hard as a motorway. But the first team and everyone else we've got on, obviously the first team pitches is different. They've got 100 soil 18 and we've got some frost covers. Even the frost covers haven't worked on the soil pitches because they only go down to about -2, -3. So unfortunately, go on.
Ask you another question, Andy. Goal celebrations, the sliding.
Oh.
When I did stone dominoes, I used to cringe when I used to see that happening. Of course, the kids do it as well now, and we can't repair our pitches as easily as maybe you can professionally. So, do you feel the same thing when you see?
Yeah, I do. I don't mind a last minute winner. I can give and take that, Clive, but we don't. We probably haven't scored that many goals just lately, so we haven't done many of them. So, but yeah, it is. It's. I wouldn't say no. It is annoying. It is hard work, but you can only speak to the coaches, can't you? And delicately speak to the players, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but it's quite dangerous. I tell you a way to do it, and we did this with our academy. And I can't remember the players, but it is if the ground conditions are very dry, and Julian he'll back me up on this. it's quite a dangerous thing to do, because when you slide with your knees and you go down, if you don't slide, you can knock your knee. You can put your kneecap straight out.
Right.
So if the conditions aren't right for sliding, quite often you can put your kneecap the other side of your leg. So that's probably the best way of tackling it with the younger kids, is just saying that it is a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, just mention an ACL or a PCL. There's a big risk of cruciate ligament injury in sliding, and I'll put the fear of God into them. That'd be my tactic. But yeah, otherwise they'll probably just look at you like you've gone funny in the head if you tell them to stop doing celebration. But yeah, I've seen it all. There was I can't remember who it was. There was quite a high profile example of somebody in the Football League who'd had quite a significant injury from a slide celebration.
Yeah,
But
that's who I was trying to think of, but I couldn't think of him.
I'll have a Google.
So, you been keeping busy, Clive, as normal?
Yes, as normal, yeah. There's always things to do, Andy.
Good.
Lads and dads. Yeah.
Good.
Even off the pitch is busy.
Yeah. Good.
As Nicky will confirm.
Yeah.
Vicky, sorry, not Nicky. Nicky.
Yes.
How's Uttoxeter, Brett? Is Uttoxeter going well?
Marchington.
Well, I meant the areas, and when I was driving through.
No, it's I suffered this weekend. We actually had one team decided to do a pitch inspection. We cancelled ours. We were playing in Leek. Wednesday, I rang them up and said, look, there's no way we're playing. Check the forecast.
Yeah.
And he agreed. So we got that cancelled early doors.
Yeah.
And then I heard that one of the teams were thinking of doing a pitch inspection. So I spoke to Alan Parker, who sorts all the fixtures out. I said, Alan, if they do that, the ref comes down, they've got to be paying the ref. He's ruined his Sunday. There's no way it's on. And lo and behold, common sense didn't prevail, and the ref turned up and straight away said, we're not playing on this.
Common sense, yeah.
Well, I mean, our pitch, it's because of the brook that runs beside it.
Yes.
Marchington flooded last week when it was really bad.
I was going to say last Monday, wasn't it? It was really bad just before the frost.
Yeah, so then we still got ice on our pitch today.
Yeah, we're the same at the training ground, the front pitch. There's probably an area, a fifth of the pitch is just where it was a lake. It's just for like an ice rink.
I think tonight when I come back earlier, JCB Lakes, they've still got ice on the top of them.
Yeah. Crazy.
Like I say, it's going to be this weekend. We're not there anyway, we're away, but we've got two junior teams that play there as well. So,
well, the forecast didn't go a bit cooler again later in the week, so I think this weekend could be touch and go for a few people. Personally,
they're pretty well behaved, because if I just on our group, I just put fit to play or not fit to play. There's no arguments. They just say all right then.
Yeah, I think Julien made a good point early on in the presentation about that, in terms of once the frost comes out, they're just going to be so wet that there was that much moisture around, and that's what I think people are going to forget. So there'll be a lot of pooling of water standing around places.
Go from a bone hard pitch to a waterlogged one.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've got a photo that a lad sent me this week. Now his pitch was covered in molehills. Done nothing about it, so he just kept treading them in every time there's a game. Badgers got on the pitch. You want to see the mess it's made of it. You may as well go on there with a digger.
Nasty.
It's got to be 10, 15 foot of damage, and it's got to be a good 6 inches plus deep when it's turfed up.
Yeah, it will do.
Keep an eye out for that one then, Vicky.
No, they're not involved in the programme. They're not.
Oh, okay.
They might need to be.
Well, they can.
The lads who pitch it is, you can give him as much advice as possible and tell him, say, look, try and think you should be doing this. Can you do it? Yeah, we'll do it. And he doesn't do it. He does completely the opposite. You tell him not to roll it, he'll be on it that week and he'll be rolling it 10 times.
I'll tell him to roll it then, and then he'll do the opposite.
Reverse psychology of people's the best way sometimes. I've had football well, probably Julian would say this is you can do that with the coaches quite often. Reverse psychology, because they've always want to be the boss, so you just tell them the opposite what you want, and they'll end up doing what you want without them telling.
Make it seem like it's their idea.
That's the one.
Brilliant. Well, if we've not got anything else, I'll let everybody get off and get a brew or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I've got my pitch
Yeah, thank you
inspection.
for that, Julian. Very, very interesting. Thanks.
No problem at all.
Yeah, thanks, Julian.
I always say with these things, I want to make sure that I'm delivering stuff that's useful for yourself. So if you've got any particular areas that you need support with, or other, it's no difficulty for me jumping on a webinar or traveling up for an evening if there's particular things that you want to cover off. So do let Vicky know if there's any areas that you want to have more detail on.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right,
All
thanks, folks.
Nice
I'll
one.
see you,
Cheers,
Can you
Julian.
hang on a moment?
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Cheers.
Vicky.
Bye.
Cheers, everybody.
What was that? Sorry,
Can you hang
Clive.
on a moment, Simon? Can you hang on a minute?
Yes, no, that's fine. Yeah.
And Simon, please.
Simon's gone, I think, Clive.
Oh dear. All right, you stay there, please.
Okay, that's
Right.
fine. Bye.
Thanks a lot, then,
See you
Vicky. I'll let
later.
you
No
go.
worries.
Right.
All right.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Yeah. Oh, you've gone big on me. Yeah. Apparently, the machine is all signed off now.
Okay, yeah.
Were you the secondary?
Was I the secondary? I don't think so.
Simon said you had to sign it.
No. I know, was it someone? I might have been someone called Nikki, but I don't think it wouldn't have been me. Let me
Hang
just.
on. Yeah, I get Nicky and Vicky
No,
mixed
that's
up.
fine. I think I
Nikki.
recall. Yes, I recall seeing someone called Nikki as being the secondary contact.
Nicky's the treasurer.
So that's who needs to
Nikki.
sign it next then.
Right. Understand that now. And also, he said that he couldn't see any evidence of the pitch funding, the grass funding on there.
Right. Okay. Shall I give him a call? Perhaps tomorrow, Clive, because since they've updated the grant management system, my permissions have changed.
Right.
So before, I used to be able to log in and see absolutely everything, whereas now I can't. I should be able to, but for some unknown reason, my permissions at the minute aren't giving me the access that I used to have. So when I log in with my details, I can't see any of that detail. So I'd have to have Simon's login details to have a look to see what's going on. But I'll give him a call tomorrow. I don't think I've got any kind of meetings or anything in my diary, so I am pretty much free all day. So I'll try him in the morning, and just see if I can get his login details to have a look what's going on. It might just be because the system's changed. It's not quite obvious where it is, but it should be there.
Yeah, I mean, that should be the first one that's clear, because
Yeah.
the machinery came on afterwards, didn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll give him a call tomorrow, and just see if I can get his details off him, just so I can log in and have a little look what's going on.
Okay, you've got his number, haven't you?
Yes, you've sent it me. Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. You are Vicky.
Yes, Vicky. That's okay. Not a problem.
Yeah. All right, Vicky. Okay, all the best.
Yeah, and
Bye
you
now.
speak soon. Bye. Bye.
Bye.